Have you ever seen a dog behave like it's trying to tell you something, only you don't speak the language? That's exactly how Nina Lawson felt the morning she found Cooper scratching at the old built-in bookshelf in her late uncle's study. It wasn't just a pawing or a curious nudge. This was frantic, intentional, like he knew something was behind it and it had to come out. At first she laughed, then she got chills, because that was only day 3 in the house and Cooper hadn't acted like this once before. Nina had never planned to move back to rural Virginia, especially not into the musty, creaky old house on Ashbury Lane where her Uncle George had lived alone for decades. But after the divorce, the job, layoff, and her mother's passing all within a year, she needed somewhere to land. Her uncle's passing had left the place empty, and to everyone's surprise, Nina in the will. A free house, quiet, a fresh start. It sounded good on paper. But what the paper didn't mention was that the house had its own story, and it wasn't quite done being told. Cooper came into her life on impulse. She'd gone to the shelter just to look, but the moment the big German shepherd walked up to the gate and sat staring into her soul like he'd already chosen her, Nina knew it was a done deal. He wasn't young, maybe 8 or 9, with a silvering muzzle and a small scar across his right ear. Shelter volunteers said he'd been through a lot, though they didn't elaborate. Still, he was calm, protective, loyal, and strangely very alert, always listening, always observing, which is what made his behavior in the study so unnerving. It started one morning as Nina was sorting through dusty boxes in the living room. She heard a low growl, just a single rumble followed by loud scratching, not like a dog trying to dig, more like trying to get in. Cooper, she called, brushing her hands off on her jeans and walking toward the noise. He didn't stop when she entered the study. He just kept digging at the left corner of the bookshelf, an old built-in made of dark wood warped from years of humidity. "Hey, what are you doing?" She laughed nervously. He paused, looked up at her, and let out a low whine. It felt deliberate. Nina kneeled beside him and ran her hand along the shelf. No weird smells, no visible pests, no holes or cracks. "You're being weird," she whispered. But her gut said something else. The next day it happened again. Same spot, same scratching. By day 4, she was starting to get irritated. "Cooper, stop. There's nothing back there." She tugged his collar gently. He resisted. And that's when she noticed it's something subtle, something off. When she pressed her palm against the back panel of the bookshelf, it didn't feel solid. It gave just slightly, like there was a space behind it. Hollow. She knocked gently. Thunk, thunk. Definitely hollow. And cold. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Cooper's behavior. What was it about that shelf? He didn't react that way to any other part of the house, not even the basement. Around 2:00 a.m., she gave in, pulled on a hoodie, and went back to the study. Cooper was already there, lying in front of the shelf like a guard dog. "All right, you win," she muttered, flipping on the lamp. She began pulling books off the shelves. Most were dusty old law books and history volumes. But then she noticed something strange. A handful of the books weren't real at all, just cardboard spines with hollow insides. Behind them, a faint crack in the wood paneling. Her skin tingled. She grabbed her phone and snapped a few pictures, then switched to video and started recording the area. Cooper stood beside her tail, still head tilted. "You're not just a good boy," she whispered. "You're a detective. If you believe dogs are more than pets, and sometimes even heroes, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for Heroes for Animals. There's more to this story than meets the eye." The next morning, she sent the video to her neighbor Ray Bishop, a retired police detective who had been friends with her uncle back in the 70s. Within minutes, her phone buzzed. "Ray, where exactly did you say that shelf was?" "Nina, the study, left wall. Cooper's obsessed with it." "Ray, can I come over today?" He showed up 20 minutes later with coffee, a flashlight, and that retired cop stiffness that made Nina's kitchen feel like a precinct. Together, they examined the shelf. Ray tapped around the panel slowly. "It's definitely hollow," he said. "You know, your uncle was once involved peripherally in a missing persons case. Happened in 72. Guy vanished during a corruption investigation. Whole town was shaken. Never solved." Nina stared at him. "Uncle George, he was a high school teacher." Ray raised an eyebrow. "People wear a lot of hats, especially back then." They pulled the remaining books down and exposed the full wooden panel. Behind it, they found a faint seam in the wall, barely visible but rectangular, maybe 18 inches by 24. Ray leaned in. "This isn't just part of the house. This is a compartment." "Like a hiding spot?" Nina asked. "Or a safe." They both turned to Cooper, who now sat in the doorway, like a sentry watching. His ears flicked. He let out a quiet huff. Either way, Ray said this dog's onto something. That afternoon, Nina couldn't stop thinking about her uncle. Why would he build something into the wall and never tell anyone? And what could be so important that even a dog 50 years later would sense it? She paced the floor. Cooper followed her every move. Then without warning, he stopped and barked. Once. Sharp. Loud. At the shelf. Like he was saying, open it. Now, the next morning, Nina stood in front of the bookshelf with her arms crossed, staring at the faint seam in the wood like it might blink first. Cooper sat beside her, silent now, but with that same alert posture. He wasn't restless anymore. He was waiting. Ray Bishop arrived at 10 a.m. sharp, toolbox in hand, and a thermos of coffee swinging at his side like it was part of his uniform. The man may have been retired, but he still carried himself like someone who expected trouble behind every locked door. I thought about it all night, he said as he stepped inside. There's no reason a bookshelf should have hollow space behind it unless someone wanted it that way. I kept dreaming about it, Nina replied. Kept seeing my uncle standing in front of that wall, turning back to look at me like he wanted to say something but couldn't. Ray raised an eyebrow. You sure you're ready to see what's back there? No, she said honestly, but I want to know. They cleared the area books off the shelves, the armchair pushed to the side, Cooper leashed just in case he got too excited. Nina felt like she was prepping for minor surgery, wiping down surfaces that hadn't been cleaned since Clinton was president. Ray got to work with a small crowbar and a flashlight. The wood was old, dry, and didn't put up much of a fight. Within minutes, one panel creaked free, revealing a rectangular steel face. It was dull, oxidized in spots, and built directly into the wall. Nina took a step back. It's a safe, Ray confirmed, running his hand along the edges. Flush mount, pre-1980s. These were custom. Probably weighed 100 pounds when it was installed. Can you open it, Nina asked. Ray squatted and examined the rusted dial. It's got a manual lock. No digital keypad, no keyhole. Just a good old-fashioned combination dial. Might take a while. How long is a while? He smirked. How good are you at making sandwiches? Over the next 3 hours, Ray tried every trick he remembered from his years on the force. Listening to the clicks, adjusting the tension, resetting after each failed attempt. Nina sat nearby, trying not to chew her nails off. She Googled everything she could about safes and even called the local locksmith, who quoted her $400 just to come look. Cooper didn't move. He remained seated in the doorway, his eyes locked on the safe like it owed him answers. Then sometime after 2 p.m. there was a sound, a heavy internal clunk, deep and mechanical. Ray leaned back with a low whistle. That's the sound you want to hear. Nina stood. It's open. Ray turned the dial once more and pulled. The door groaned as it swung outward, slow and stiff from decades of stillness. Inside was a stack of manila folders yellowed with age. On top sat a leather-bound notebook in a folded envelope marked in faded ink to Ray Bishop, in case I'm gone. Nina's breath caught. Ray just stared. That's my name. He took the envelope, careful not to tear the brittle paper, and opened it with a slowness Nina recognized, not caution, but reverence. Inside was a single page written in her uncle's neat cursive. Ray, if you're reading this, I either trusted you enough to show someone, or I didn't make it to do it myself. This is about Carl. I never stopped thinking about what happened. I kept the evidence. I had to. I couldn't trust anyone else, not back then. Not even you. You'll know what to do now. George. Ray folded the letter slowly, then looked at Nina. Carl Whitmore, he said, like the name had been buried deep in some forgotten file cabinet in his brain. He disappeared in the fall of '72. Local guy, blue collar, worked maintenance at City Hall. Said he had dirt on some politicians and cops. Next thing anyone knew, he vanished. Wait, my uncle knew him. Ray nodded. They went to high school together. Used to be friends. But I thought George cut ties with him years before that. Nina knelt beside the safe. What kind of evidence are we talking about? Ray pulled out the notebook. Let's find out. The pages inside were dense handwritten logs, dates, places, and names. There were clippings from old newspapers folded between the pages, receipts, paper clipped to the back cover, even a Polaroid of what looked like a burned-out pickup truck, half buried in leaves. They flipped to the last few entries. October 3rd, 1972. Carl showed me the tape, said it proved payoffs between Councilman Grant and the chief. I told him to take it to the feds. He said he'd be dead before the week was out. October 6th, Carl didn't show up at the diner, drove to his place. Door was unlocked. His dog was still inside. October 8th, found the truck near Fox Hollow. Smashed windows, blood on the seat. No sign of Carl. Took photos, kept the tape. No one can know. Holy hell, Ray muttered. Fox Hollow's about 10 miles from here. That was all private hunting land back then. And the tape, Nina asked. Ray reached deeper into the safe and pulled out a small metal film canister. It's here. Nina sat down hard on the floor, her legs giving out beneath her. My uncle, he had all this for 50 years. Why wouldn't he tell anyone? Because he was scared, Ray said. You don't cross the wrong people in a town like this, not in the 70s. Especially not when the wrong people are the ones running the place. But why keep it at all? Because he wanted this truth to survive, even if he didn't. They spent the next hour cataloging what they'd found. The folders contained typed statements, some of which matched names from Carl's case file. A hand-drawn map pointed to a location outside of Fox Hollow marked with an X. Ray stared at it. If Carl's body is where I think it is, this could solve one of the oldest unsolved cases in this part of Virginia. Nina looked at Cooper, and we would have never known if it weren't for him. Ray nodded. Some dogs bark, some dig. But yours, he's got instincts, like he knew it mattered. That evening, Nina sat in the study with the leather notebook open in her lap. The late-day sun streamed through the blinds, casting long, golden lines across the carpet. Cooper lay at her feet, resting at last. Ray was making calls, former colleagues, maybe even the state police. Tomorrow they'd visit Fox Hollow. But tonight, Nina finally felt something she hadn't in a long time. Purpose. She looked down at Cooper. Thank you, she whispered. He wagged his tail once and drifted off to sleep. The morning air in Virginia had that crisp, earthy smell that only late fall could bring. Leaves crunched underfoot, fog clung low to the ground, and for the first time in a long time, Nina Lawson felt like she was chasing something real, something that mattered. Ray Bishop pulled his old Silverado into the gravel drive just after 7 a.m., a worn ball cap on his head and a thermos of black coffee already half gone. Cooper Ever the Sentinel was waiting by the front door, tail-wagging eyes locked on the truck like he knew what was coming. You ready, Ray asked as Nina climbed in, clutching the notebook and map from the safe. As I'll ever be, she said. You really think we'll find something? Ray didn't answer right away. He glanced out at the mist rolling over the nearby hills. I think your uncle never did anything halfway. If he marked that X, it means something. They drove in silence for a while, the notebook resting between them like a loaded weapon. The further they got from town, the more the landscape shifted. Neat fences gave way to wild underbrush, and paved roads turned to broken gravel and dirt. Fox Hollow wasn't on any GPS. It was the kind of place locals knew from memory passed down in stories whispered over diner coffee or late-night beers. The kind of place where things disappeared. The trail was barely visible, overgrown and half-swallowed by time. Ray parked the truck at the edge of the woods and shouldered a pack with supplies. Flashlights, gloves, a shovel, and a plastic evidence container he'd pulled from his attic. Old habits die hard. Nina slipped on a hoodie and followed close, Cooper leading the way. He stayed low to the ground, nose working overtime, tail stiff. Every few steps he'd pause and look back as if making sure they were still coming. He's acting different, Nina whispered. Ray nodded. He's tracking something. It took them nearly 40 minutes to reach the spot marked on George's map, a shallow incline, just past a dried-up creek bed half-ringed by mossy stones. Cooper stopped at the base of a split oak tree and began to sniff in tight, urgent circles. Then he started to dig. The first thing they found was a piece of weathered blue fabric, possibly denim, caught in a root system. Then a cracked leather boot sole, partially buried, eaten away by time and insects. Ray crouched low, brushing dirt aside with gloved hands. He didn't say a word, but his jaw tensed. His eyes narrowed. Next came bone, a partial femur, then ribs, fragmented but unmistakable. Nina stepped back, her breath catching in her throat. Oh my God. Ray didn't look up. It's human. They worked slowly, methodically, documenting everything with Nina's phone. Cooper sat off to the side now, watching with quiet intensity as if he understood what had been uncovered. Ray finally stood. We need to call this in, officially. Nina nodded. Are you ready for that? Not even close, he said. But it's time. By early afternoon, the area was surrounded by county police and forensic investigators. The site was now a crime scene. Yellow tape flapped in the wind. Deputies took statements. A young detective with a clipboard kept glancing at Nina like he wasn't sure whether to thank her or question her. But Ray handled it all. His badge might be retired, but his voice still carried weight. He handed over the notebook, the letter from George, and the metal canister containing the old tape reel. The county coroner confirmed the bones were male, likely Caucasian, aged between 30 and 40, and had been in the ground for decades. Identification would take time, but Ray already knew. It's Carl, he told Nina quietly. Has to be. That night, Nina couldn't sleep. She sat on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, the TV glowing silently in the background, Cooper curled at her feet. Everything felt surreal. She wasn't a detective. She wasn't even someone who liked mysteries. She was a middle school English teacher who'd come back home to pick up the pieces of her life, and now she'd helped unearth a 50-year-old murder case. All because of a dog she'd rescued on a whim. She looked down at Cooper. His breathing was slow and even, but his ears flicked with every creak in the old house. You knew, she whispered. You knew something was wrong in that room. He didn't move. But something in the way his tail thumped once against the floor made her feel like he heard every word. The following day, Ray called with news. They confirmed it, he said. Dental records, it's Carl Whitmore. Nina exhaled slowly, pressing the phone to her ear. So it's real. It's all real. They've already opened an internal review of the old PD files. The corruption Carl was trying to expose, some of those names are still around. Their kids, grandkids, even campaign donors. This is going to get messy. What about my uncle? She asked quietly. Ray paused. George didn't kill Carl. That much is clear. But he covered it up. That's going to raise questions. Will they go after his name? I don't know, Ray said. But I'll speak for him. He tried to do the right thing. He just didn't know how or who to trust. 2 days later, local news picked up the story. Cold case breakthrough, human remains found in Fox Hollow. Identified as 1972 missing man. The article barely mentioned Nina. It focused on the case on Carl Whitmore's mysterious disappearance and the fresh investigation into decades-old corruption. But what no one could explain, what no one even tried to print, was how they found him. No one mentioned Cooper. No one talked about the dog who wouldn't stop scratching at a bookshelf. At first, Nina was relieved. She didn't want the attention, but something about it felt wrong, like Cooper deserved more. So she posted a photo to her Facebook, a simple shot of him lying on the floor in front of the now empty wall where the safe had been. This is the hero. I didn't find the safe. I didn't know where to look. Cooper did. He saved Carl's story. He gave George peace. He gave me purpose. It went viral. Within 48 hours, the local paper reached out. Then a podcast. Then national headlines. Rescue dog solves cold case. German Shepherd leads owner to hidden evidence. The dog who remembered. Ray and Nina sat together on the porch the next weekend, watching the late afternoon light stretch across the lawn. Cooper dozed between them, his muzzle resting on Nina's boot. I always thought I'd solve a big case one day, Ray said, sipping from a mason jar. Didn't expect it to happen after retirement with a dog doing the heavy lifting. Nina smiled. He's not just a dog. No, Ray agreed. He's proof that some instincts are stronger than silence, stronger than time. They sat in comfortable quiet, the kind that only comes after chaos begins to settle. Somewhere in the trees, an owl called out. The world kept moving. But for the first time in decades, Carl Whitmore's name was back in the open. And the town would have to listen. By the end of the week, Nina Lawson's front porch looked more like a press booth than a peaceful Virginia porch. Satellite trucks lined Ashbury Lane. Reporters in slick jackets whispered into microphones as cameras rolled. Curious neighbors passed by slowly in their pickups, eyes narrowed behind sunglasses. And through it all, Cooper sat stoically at the top of the steps, tail tucked under him, ears twitching at every rustle. He hated the noise. So did Nina. The first few interviews had been okay local outlets, polite questions. But when a national news channel picked up the story and called Cooper a canine cold case crusader, things spiraled. People showed up just to see him. Strangers brought dog treats and letters. Someone mailed him a sheriff's badge made of felt. Nina appreciated the love, but she hadn't asked for any of it. Inside the house, she paced the study like it was a cage. The safe was still open, now empty. The shelf was bare, but the room still carried a strange weight, like something had been disturbed that didn't want to be. Ray Bishop sat in her uncle's old leather chair, his elbows on his knees, flipping through the final pages of the leather notebook. There's one name that keeps popping up, he said. Everett Grant. The councilman. Ray nodded. He's the son of Walter Grant, who Carl had pegged as part of the corruption ring back in '72. Walter died in '98, but Everett, he's running for state senate this year. Nina frowned. You think this'll affect his campaign? I think it already has, Ray replied. Everett's been on every talk show this week denying any involvement. Says his father was a pillar of the community. He called the evidence circumstantial and said your uncle was a conspiracy theorist. Nina scoffed. Of course he did. Ray leaned back. Problem is public opinion is shifting. People are starting to ask questions. And when politicians feel threatened, They pushed back hard. Sure enough, by Friday, Nina received her first letter from a law firm. A carefully worded notice that any public accusations against the Grant family directly or by implication may constitute defamation. She read it twice before handing it to Ray. "They're trying to intimidate you," he said. "They want you quiet. I'm not saying anything that's not already in that notebook. Doesn't matter, they'll twist it." Nina folded the letter and set it aside. They can try. That night, she sat in bed with her laptop open, skimming through articles, reading every comment, every thread. Most were supportive. People called Cooper a hero. They called her brave. But some were different. Anonymous posts questioning her motives, accusing her of seeking attention, asking why she waited so long to reveal the safe. The internet could turn on you fast. Nina knew that. Still, she couldn't stop scrolling. Beside her, Cooper stirred. He sat up, ears perked, and let out a low growl toward the darkened hallway. She paused. "What is it, boy?" Cooper didn't move. Then came a knock at the door. Ray answered before she could reach the foyer. He'd taken to staying in the guest room just in case. A tall man in a suit stood on the porch holding a business card and a federal ID. "Detective Bishop?" he asked. Ray nodded slowly. "Retired." "Agent Samuel Perez, FBI. Mind if we speak?" Nina joined them. Perez explained he'd been assigned to a joint task force reviewing unsolved public corruption cases with possible ties to missing persons. "We've been watching the Whitmore case since it hit the wires," he said. "And the evidence your uncle preserved, it's credible." Nina's chest tightened. "So what happens now?" Perez looked at both of them. "If you're willing, I'd like to take custody of the notebook, the photos, and the tape. Our lab can restore the audio. It could be the missing piece." Nina looked at Ray. He gave her a small nod. "All right," she said. "But I want to know what happens next. I want updates." Perez smiled. "Of course. And Ms. Lawson, thank your dog." By Monday, the FBI confirmed that the tape, despite damage, contained audio of a meeting between Carl Whitmore and two men. One voice was identifiable, Walter Grant. The conversation mentioned payoffs bearing bad press and threats made against Carl for running his mouth. It was damning. And finally, it was public. The audio clip leaked online within 48 hours. National news ran segments on the corruption. Everett Grant canceled his next 3 campaign events. Protesters showed up at the courthouse holding signs that read, "Justice for Carl George was right. Listen to the dog." But with attention came pressure. One morning, Nina found her tires slashed. The next, someone spray-painted "traitor" on her mailbox. Cooper growled at every passing car, and she started keeping the porch light on all night. "You still think it was worth it?" Ray asked one evening as they watched deputies photograph the mailbox. Nina thought for a moment. Then she looked at Cooper. "He barked until I listened," she said. "And when I did, the truth came out. So yeah, it was worth it." Ray nodded. "Then you'd better get used to barking back." The town began to shift. Old-timers started sharing stories about secret meetings, shady deals, things they had heard but were too afraid to repeat. Carl's name was spoken again, not as a rumor or a ghost, but as a man who tried to do the right thing. Nina received a letter in the mail, handwritten in shaky penmanship. "I knew Carl. He was kind, honest. We all knew something bad happened, but no one had the guts to say it. Thank you for bringing him back." It had no return address, but she pinned it to the study wall anyway. One afternoon, Nina was asked to speak at the high school, her old school, about the case. She brought Cooper with her. He wore a vest that read "Hero Dog." The students erupted in applause when he entered. She told them about fear, about silence, about listening to instincts, to people, even to dogs, especially to dogs. After the assembly, a girl in the front row raised her hand. "Do you think your uncle was a hero?" Nina thought hard before answering. "I think he was scared. I think he made mistakes. But I also think he carried the truth for 50 years and trusted me enough to finish what he couldn't." She looked at Cooper. "And I think this guy knew it was time." That night, for the first time in months, Nina slept without waking up. And in the quiet hours before dawn, with the world still dark and soft, Cooper came to her bedside, nudged her hand gently, then laid down with a sigh. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. It was just past 6 a.m. when the call came in. Nina stirred in bed, her phone buzzing on the nightstand. Cooper lifted his head beside her, ears alert. His eyes tracked her hand as she picked up the phone, blinking into the glow. "Ray," she answered. "Is everything okay?" His voice was tight but calm. "They found the rest of it, Nina, near the creek bed. FBI wants us both there. Now." Her stomach dropped. The drive to Fox Hollow felt shorter this time, though the road hadn't changed, still lined with skeletal trees and shadows that clung to the gravel like secrets. Ray didn't speak much, only tapping the steering wheel with the side of his thumb like he did when his thoughts were racing. Cooper rode in the back seat, standing with his nose pressed to the window tail, stiff. He'd never been here before, but somehow he knew where they were going. When they arrived, the site was already active. Yellow tape sectioned off a small ravine near the creek. A team and FBI windbreakers worked methodically, pulling debris from the mud, documenting every item like it might hold the truth. Agent Perez spotted them and waved them over. "We found something big," he said, buried inside a sealed wooden crate wrapped in oilcloth, almost perfectly preserved. He led them to a folding table under a tarp. On it lay the contents of the crate, 2 more notebooks, a second tape reel in better condition than the first, and a handful of faded photographs. Ray leaned in, his face pale. "Those photos," he whispered. "That's a payoff." One of the images showed Walter Grant Carl Whitmore and 2 other men standing together in what looked like a garage. Carl held a manila envelope. Walter was handing him something cash, it looked like. Crisp 20s mid-count. The date on the back, September 12, 1972. Perez unfolded a map found inside one of the notebooks. Red marks circled several locations across the county, warehouses, offices, even a church. "This isn't just a cover-up," he said. "It was a network." Carl had tracked them all. He was preparing to go public, maybe with the press, maybe federal. Either way, someone shut him up before he could. Nina felt a coldness grip her chest. He died trying to stop them. Ray looked away. Perez continued. "The second tape is longer. It's a full conversation. Carl details everything, the names, the payments, the threats. And then," he paused. "And then what Nina asked." Perez looked at her. "Then he says your uncle came to warn him." They played the tape on site using headphones. Nina sat at the edge of the truck bed, hands trembling slightly as the audio filled her ears. Carl's voice was clear, emotion in every syllable. He spoke about pressure being followed, how even his coworkers started acting differently. And then toward the end came the part no one expected. "George came by last night, told me to hide everything, said it wasn't safe anymore. He offered to bury the stuff, said he'd keep it until things blew over. I trust him. Always did. He's not part of this. He's scared too." Nina's throat tightened. Her uncle hadn't just preserved evidence. He had tried to save a friend. Later that evening, back at the house, Nina sat at the kitchen table, the old notebook spread out in front of her like relics. She flipped through Carl's handwriting, every detail, every risk he took to expose the truth. Cooper lay at her feet, one paw draped over the other, tail flicking gently. He was the only calm thing in her world right now. Ray poured 2 glasses of bourbon and slid one to her. "To Carl," he said. "And George." She clinked his glass softly. "To doing what's right, even when it costs everything." The next day, the FBI held a press conference at the courthouse steps. Nina stood to the side out of frame, Cooper by her side in his vest. She didn't want the spotlight. She just wanted the truth spoken aloud. Agent Perez addressed the crowd. "With the discovery of this evidence, we are officially reopening a federal investigation into the Grant family and associated individuals tied to the corruption and subsequent disappearance of Carl Whitmore in 1972. We also wish to acknowledge the late George Lawson, whose actions preserved the critical evidence that made this possible." The crowd murmured. Perez continued, "Justice delayed is not always justice denied, but it does take people willing to look again. People and animals who refuse to forget." Back home, Nina was met with flowers on the porch, cards in the mail, and a handwritten letter from Carl's last surviving relative, his niece April. "I was 5 when Carl disappeared. I only remember him from photos and the way my mom cried at night. Thank you for not letting him stay lost. Thank you for giving him back to us." But not everyone was grateful. Online forums buzzed with speculation. Some accused Nina of profiting off Carl's death. Others insisted the evidence was planted. Conspiracy theories bloomed like weeds. And Everett Grant, he disappeared from the public eye. His campaign collapsed within days. Federal investigators issued subpoenas. His home was searched. But Nina knew better than to celebrate too early. Powerful people did not go quietly. She kept her circle tight. Ray Cooper, the occasional call from Perez. She avoided interviews, declined book offers. She went back to tutoring part-time at the library. And sometimes late at night, she'd sit in the study now, bare except for a photo of George and Carl together at a county fair in 1969, smiling. She'd light a candle, not for closure, but for remembrance. One evening, Ray showed up unannounced. "I've been thinking," he said, "about Carl, about your uncle, about how things went down." Nina offered him coffee and leaned against the counter. He made a choice, Ray said, to stay silent, maybe out of fear, maybe to protect you. But in the end, he gave you everything. I still wish he'd told me. I think he did, Ray said, nodding toward Cooper, who lay in his usual spot. Just not with words. A week later, Nina took Cooper on a long walk through town. People waved. A few stopped to say thank you. Kids asked to pet him. One even brought him a squeaky toy in the shape of a badge. As they passed the courthouse lawn, she paused. There was a new plaque freshly installed beneath the flagpole. It read, "In memory of Carl Whitmore, 1940 to 1972, who gave everything to tell the truth." And below it in smaller font, "With gratitude to George Lawson, Ray Bishop, Nina Lawson and Cooper for never giving up." Nina knelt beside the plaque, running her fingers over the engraved words. Cooper sat next to her, then leaned in gently. The sun was warm, the grass was soft, and for the first time she felt like the town had finally listened. 6 months later, the leaves began to fall again on Ashbury Lane. Summer had faded quietly into early autumn, and with it came the kind of silence Nina Lawson had once feared, but now welcomed. Not the silence of loneliness, but of healing, of space, of breath. Life had changed in ways she never imagined. The safe was gone, the reporters were long gone too. The mailbox had been replaced, the Trader spray paint sanded off the old fence. Most days, Nina could walk through town without anyone whispering, without anyone pointing. Some remembered her, some remembered Cooper, but most just remembered what happened. And that, in the end, was the point. Carl Whitmore's remains were finally laid to rest in a public ceremony at Oak Ridge Memorial Cemetery. Dozens of people came, some who had known him, others who had only known his name from whispers and headlines. Nina was asked to speak. She kept it short. "We're not here today just to bury a man, but to honor someone who spoke when others stayed quiet." Carl told the truth, and for a long time, no one listened. But truth doesn't disappear. It waits. It finds a way back. Even if it takes 50 years. Even if it takes a dog scratching at a wall to uncover it. Cooper stood beside her through it all, calm, composed, and watching the crowd with the same focus that had started this journey in the first place. After the service, Carl's niece April gave Nina a small wooden box. Inside was an old black and white photo of Carl holding a puppy, circa 1961. Taped to the back was a note. "He always trusted animals more than people. Guess he was right." Nina placed the photo on her mantle next to one of George Younger and, laughing, caught mid-sentence in a moment long gone. Sometimes she'd light a candle for both of them. Not because it brought them back, but because it reminded her that they'd never fully left. Ray Bishop visited often, sometimes for coffee, sometimes with his old detective buddies now retired, and finally free to talk about the things they'd once kept buried. The investigation had spread beyond the Grant family. A handful of arrests were made, people who thought they'd escaped justice. Federal indictments followed. A few quietly settled, others made headlines. Everett Grant never served time, but his name was ruined. His political future dissolved. He sold his family estate and moved out of state, somewhere cold and remote. His name became a cautionary tale about legacy silence and what happens when the past claws its way back. One rainy afternoon, Nina sat curled on the couch with Cooper by her side, a book open in her lap. She paused absently, scratching behind his ears. "You know," she said, softly, "I still don't know how you knew. About the wall, about the safe." He tilted his head at her tail, thumping. "You just wouldn't let it go," she smiled. "You didn't bark. You didn't howl. You just scratched, quiet, consistent, like you were waiting for someone to finally listen." He leaned in and licked her wrist. "I'm glad it was me," she whispered. The town had changed too. A new mayor had been elected, young, full of energy, and openly supportive of transparency and reform. The city council voted to release hundreds of old records once sealed. A special commission was formed to review past complaints against public officials. It didn't fix everything, but it was something. The library started a new community program called Uncovering the Past. Nina was invited to help run it, part-time tutoring students on how to research historical events, write essays, and ask the kind of questions that dig deeper. "Don't take things at face value," she often told them. "Ask why it was written, and who might have wanted it forgotten." On the one-year anniversary of Carl's discovery, the town held a small memorial. Nina stood quietly beside the bronze plaque in the courthouse lawn, Cooper sitting at her feet in a clean vest. They added a new line beneath the original inscription. "This town is better because the truth came out." Children left drawings and flowers. A few people brought their own dogs. One woman told Nina that after following her story, she'd adopted a senior German shepherd from the shelter. She's stubborn, the woman laughed. But sometimes I wonder if she's trying to tell me something. Nina smiled knowingly. They usually are. That night, she walked home alone, the leash wrapped gently in her hand. Halfway there, Cooper stopped suddenly and looked up at her. "What is it, bud?" He just stared at her for a long moment, tail still, ears up. Nina waited, heart racing slightly. But then he blinked and nudged her leg like he was saying, "Just checking. Keep going." She laughed and walked on. Sometimes ghosts don't haunt you. Sometimes they just walk with you until you're ready to keep going without them. Later that week, she sat down to write it all out. Not for a book, not for an article, just for herself. She titled it simply, "The Dog Who Remembered." In the final line she wrote, "He didn't speak, he didn't bark. He just scratched at a wall until the truth made its way through. And in doing so, he saved more than just a case, he saved me." The study now held only a desk, a reading lamp, and a new bookshelf, one Cooper didn't scratch at. On the top shelf sat a small frame with a quote from Carl's notebook. "If they won't listen now, they will later. Truth waits." And on the floor right beside it was Cooper's bed. Thank you for following Nina and Cooper's journey. Sometimes it is not just about solving a mystery, but about learning how to listen, even when the message comes in silence. What would you have done if your dog kept scratching at the same wall every day? Would you have listened or walked away? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to hug your dog today.